Welcome to this next nowRail tutorial, and today we're going to be looking at custom functions. Now, custom functions are bits of code that users can add to nowRail to do things that nowRail doesn't do by default. So let's get started by looking at what's on the breadboard. So as you can see, I've got my trusty power cab here. Down here, I've got the ESP32 connected to the DCC decoder circuit. I'll just show you what this is about. If we go to the nowRail web page, go down to the DCC controller input, and there is a circuit here that when connected to any DCC controller, you just put these two connections to the track with this small circuit, and it means that any accessory decoder inputs that are put into your DCC system are immediately transmitted over the ESP-NOW system. So if you want to know more about that, there is a video 80 that explains how all of that works. So coming back to the webcam, this ESP32 then is receiving the inputs. This ESP32 here and these two boards are nothing to do with today's project. These are actually to do with putting inputs from nowRail into the NCE controller over CAD bus, and the current experiments are going really well. Finally, over here we have the ESP32 that is going to be receiving the commands, and you can see that I've got 3 servos set up. Now within nowRail there is a set of standard functions that allow you to connect servos using a PCA 9685 board or even multiple PCA 9685 boards. However, today they're being connected directly to pins, I think it's 15, 2 and 4, and those functions are not supported directly within nowRail. So selecting Accessory 200, as you can see that one's running nicely. 201 and 202. There we go. So we can see that all of those servos are moving correctly when the appropriate DCC command is transmitted. So today we're going to look at how I was able to make that work with nowRail when nowRail does not support those functions as standard. So to get started, we need to download the latest version, and as of today the latest version is version 5. So let's get it downloaded and take a look at what we need to do. So this is the latest version of nowRail. As of today it's 0.5. I'm sure that will change fairly soon, but this code that we'll look at today will work through all versions. So the tab we're going to be looking at specifically today is the Customs Functions tab. So if I select that, let's have a look at what we have here. So the Customs Functions tab has a set of functions that you can use to control your own code, but that will receive certain information from nowRail. The reason I've added these functions in is no matter how many functions I added, someone will always want to do something that nowRail doesn't include as standard. So this is a way of making it very, very easy to add your own functions, because nowRail is going to give you, if you like, some standard built-in functions that can trigger your custom code. So the first of these functions, and probably the one that will get used the most, is a function that receives the accessory command, and this is the nowAccomRec function that we see in front of us. This function will be triggered every time nowRail receives an accessory command from any source. That would mean that if it is a button that's pressed within the nowRail system that is sending out an accessory command, or as you've seen from an external DCC system, you could have it going from JMRI, sending something into your system, an accessory command. Whatever it is, this function will always pick it up. And as you can see, it's a pretty simple function. There is a line in the top that is best to just leave alone. This is something that nowRail has that sends a response back to say that the accessory has been dealt with. Now you'll notice I put a switch statement in here, and at the bottom there is the ACK processed with a 0. The way this works is it's going to set it to a 1, and if the accessory number is not processed, then it will send a 0. And all this does is it stops the transmission over nowRail being repeated. So the way nowRail works is if an accessory command is sent over the system, if it doesn't get a message back from one of the nodes to say, I've dealt with that, it will repeat it 5 times in case there was a bad transmission. So sending the 1 back just sort of says, yep, I've got it, I've dealt with it, don't keep sending this. So here I have got an example of how I would set up a function. Let's just uncomment that. And it's very simple. This is basically if accessory address 70 is received by the system, I've just put a serial print in here, move accessory 70 to position 1, otherwise move it to position 0. And it is that function that I have used to set up those servos. So we'll take a little bit of a more detailed look at that in a moment. Now, just to be aware, obviously these are just some examples of how it would work, and I'm going to control some servos, but this could be controlling anything. It could be sending a command to a turntable, a traverser. It might be a custom lighting function. You might have one of those arc welder things that you want turned on and then turned off via an accessory. It may be some building light effects. Anything can be added in here. Basically anything that nowRail doesn't control with built-in functions, you can add your own code into this little function yourself. The other custom functions, there is the now panel update, and this is when a command has been processed. So once something has been processed, and again, this is why it's so important, if you like, that this 1 gets returned, because it not only says to the system that, you know, stop sending repeats, but it also sends out a broadcast to say that if there are any control panels that need updating, so if you had a points panel, a turnout controller where you're using maybe a touch screen or buttons or whatever, it sends a command back to say, I've now processed the accessory, so change the LED or do whatever you want. I'm not sure this will be used a huge amount, but I added it in just in case someone wanted to use something other than NeoPixels, LEDs, you know, there could be something else, I have no idea. So that's the now panel update system. There is another custom function, the now time events, and if you uncomment this, it will serial print the current layout time information. Now it will send you the clock speed, the current hour, current minute, current second, and the current day, because nowRail has a 7-day system built into it. This sort of now time function would be especially useful for handheld controllers, because this is the layout time, not the, if you like, the time of day that we're actually in. This is the layout time. So if you increase the layout clock speed, then obviously this function will be called more often. But from the function like this, if you'd got an LCD display on your layout somewhere, imagine you've got a platform display showing a clock, this will actually allow you to keep your clock in sync with the actual layout clock. So that's what I've built this function for. And again, the other thing you can do, I've actually used this in the past for sending certain commands at certain times of day. So you can actually set a sort of a statement in here that would say, if it's the hour has just gone past 12 o'clock, then I want you to turn this off. And at sort of 9 hours later, I want you to turn it on, or however you want to control things. So it's not just about updating clocks, but you can actually create timed events on your layout. So for instance, you might have a load of buildings that are having the lights controlled via an accessory command, and you could set it up that a particular building, the lights come on at 6 o'clock in the evening. Layout time, that is, of course. So that is, if you like, the now time events. And again, just put your code in, there's some examples in there. I've then added another function here, and this is called my time events. And this at the moment is set to update every 1 second by default. Now, if we go back into the main nowRail tab, right at the top, there is the control code for this dropping down to the main loop. I always call current millis at the beginning of the main loop. And there is this function here. If I uncomment this, then my time events will run. And I've included this as a sample of custom code because it would allow me to create custom functions that are running in real time. Now, what I've actually done is called some built-in nowRail functions. There are some functions that allow you to find out what the layout's clock speed is, its clock hours and various things. So I'm actually calling that information once a second just as a demonstration of how it works. Next up is the GT911 touchscreen function. I did a video earlier, I think it's video 81. Let's just swap over the screens. And we see it was video 81, and this showed how to use the capacitive touchscreen as a turnout or point control panel for your layout. Now, although the video showed how to set up accessory commands and transmit them over nowRail, there could be other things that you wanted to do with the touchscreen. So I decided that I would sort of create a function that passes the X position and the Y position so that you could build your own control panel code to do other things that I can't imagine what you would want to do, but that's the point of custom functions. You're doing something that you want to do. Next up is the Now Moment button, and this allows you to write code for any button. You could although nowRail has its sort of built-in button code to send commands to different functions, you might want a button that's going to do something else. So if you put your button code in here, it will use nowRail's internal debounce code to do all the debouncing for your buttons, and all you need to do is put your code in here. This is my button. If it's pressed, do this. So that's the point of the Now Moment button. And then finally, we come down to the Now Power command. Now, this is where a command is sent out over nowRail. It will be using this particular bit of code here. Let's just bring the screen across a bit. So if I wanted to send a command out to do an emergency stop, this code at the moment is basically working for DCC-EX, and there are some various commands that you can see here that are sent out. However, if you're building your own loco controllers, that's the sort of thing that I'm doing with nowRail, it means that I can use this function to update the control panel on my controller based on the current power status of DCC-EX. And obviously, if I can work out ways to send the similar commands to other sort of command stations, I'll include that within the system as well. So that's a quick overview of all the sort of custom functions. And going up to the top, today we're going to be looking especially at the accessory custom function code. Now, if you've got any questions on any of these custom functions, please just stick them in the comments below the video and I'll try and get the relevant information to you. But what I'm going to do now is show you how I controlled those servos using this function. Now, for those of you who are used to using Arduinos, there is a built-in example for the servo library. And as you can see, you've got these two examples. And you include the library, create your servo object, attach the servo in the setup, and away you go. Simple as that. The 9 that is included is the pin that the servo is attached to. When it comes to the ESP32, the servo library doesn't work. Instead, you need to use a different library, and that library is called, quite nicely, ESP32 servo. And the example that you want to look at on this is the sweep example. Now, this library works in a very similar way to the conventional servo library. Obviously, a different include. Once again, you create your servo object, create your servo pins, and then in the setup, the main difference is this allocating the timers and then setting the servo hertz, the speed that the servo is going to be receiving its signal. And then, of course, you just attach your servo. There are these two values here. These are sort of some limiters for the PWM frequencies. I would tend to leave those alone, and obviously it takes the servo pin command. Then, very similar to the servo library, you just send, if you like, you write the position, and this position is in degrees between 0 and 179, and that moves your servo to that location. So going back to nowRail, in the main sort of sketch, I have added the library. I have then added 3 servos. So I've created 3 servo objects, boringly named my servo 1, my servo 2, and my servo 3. I have then set up the pins that I'm going to connect to, which I have used 15, 2, and 4. And then dropping down to the setup, after the my layout initiation function, I've then added the code for the timers, and for each of the servos I have set up their speeds and obviously the attach. Now, when you attach the servo, that's when you basically say to the system, this servo, I now want it controlled. So once all that's done, then all we need to do is add the code into the custom function. And that is quite simple. So go to the custom functions INO, and then scrolling up to the accessory command, you can see that I've already put the code in, and it's quite simple. I've said, right, accessory number 200, if it's passes a 1, move it to position 20 degrees, 0, move it to 150. I've done the same for accessory 201 and 202. Now, obviously, you can also do this system where you could copy this line here and put it in there. So at that point, if accessory 201 is called, if it's greater than, if it gets a 1 signal, it will move the 1 servo. If it gets a 0, it will move both of those servos. So you can control multiple items with one single accessory. So that is basically all there is to setting up the custom functions. The whole code sort of took me less than 5 minutes to write. I think I spent more time trying to remember how the ESP-32 servo library worked than doing the actual code in nowRail. But it is as simple as that, and we then finish up with exactly what we see on the webcam. And that is some servos being controlled via some DCC commands, and it is supporting some code that is not a built-in function. These are just custom functions that, as you've seen, can be written very, very quickly. So I hope that's been useful to you, and if you have any questions, please sort of get in touch with me, put some comments below the videos or whatever, and if there's any particular functions that you want to added to nowRail or any bugs that you found, again, please let me know and I'll get them sorted as quickly as possible. So thanks for listening and see you in the next video. Bye for now.